face. The pandemic limited our ability to have in-person meetings with site selection consultants this fall, but we continue to reach out to 169 consultants we have ongoing relationships with to keep them updated on changes in our regional economy. And that's even more important right now as the economy looks different in every part of the country and even the Midwest. We'll be evaluating after January 1 whether we can conduct our annual in-person consultant meetings. We usually have scheduled in Chicago during the first quarter of 2021. And if we decide that it still isn't an environment where we can do the in-person, we might go virtual or try to hold that off for 6 months and do it sometime late summer. We did successfully visit with Cedar Falls existing businesses along with Shane between mid-July through the end of August during the annual statewide existing business interview initiative called Best of Iowa. The report for the Cedar Valley and the state will be published early in 2021. This will guide the state and us on initiatives important to existing businesses right now and into the new year. And we will share that publication with Shane and the rest of the council when it comes out. Already, we've been acting on some of that need by existing businesses, and I'm happy to say we will be conducting a Cedar Valley wage and related benefits survey in 2021, thanks to some CARES money that was recently awarded to us through the CARES Act that Intercog is managing. This is something tangible we can give our existing businesses right now as they navigate through 2021 with workforce recruitment and retention as well. We are currently doing a domestic lead generation campaign right now, and I think I mentioned briefly about it during our last session. We have identified 530 companies to reach out, and we're currently trying to identify whether they have expansion plans and would they consider Northeast Iowa. That outreach began a month ago, and we're anticipating this initiative will run through March or April. Our goal is to visit between 6 to 8, they'll all be virtual in this case right now versus in person like we'd prefer. And where possible, because they are virtual, we'll be able to include Shane on some of these virtual calls when we get them scheduled. Grow Cedar Valley continues to look at innovative ways to share Cedar Falls and the Cedar Valley story with external markets, while at the same time creating a cohesive story about the city and the region's assets. We're weeks away from executing a new lead generation initiative that utilizes a live robot on the economic development portion of the GVCA's website. And on the weekdays, that a live person will be able to answer questions, whether coming from consultants or companies that are looking at that page and have specific information they're looking for that they can't find on our website. The live robot will either answer their questions or immediately forward to staff for timely follow-up. This will run parallel with the newly defined digital marketing campaign on LinkedIn that Aaron Jarnigan, who's also on this call, helped create. This marketing initiative will last 3 months, and we're going to evaluate it thereafter, make changes as necessary. Last week, we participated on virtual meetings with a total of 5 companies in France, Germany, and Switzerland that are interested in locating new facilities in the United States. Even though we can't be at Select USA this past year, we see this still as an opportunity and need to continue planting those seeds with international companies. These opportunities are long-term, and some are wanting to see how the global economy will affect their industry over the next 12 to 24 months based on the conversations from last week. International companies do take longer to nurture the relationship and establish trust than our domestic companies. I even had one manufacturer right after a virtual meeting one day establish and reach out on LinkedIn wanting to connect with us on a regular basis. We are waiting to hear from the U.S. Department of Commerce on their plans to hold the Select USA conference in June. 2 years ago, Shane accompanied me on that trip, and we had some meetings with some companies during that time. As you might recall, that event is hosted by the federal government, and it invites international companies, investors to the U.S. and connects them with state, regions, and cities that are interested with foreign direct investment. So for that, I will turn that over to you, back to you, Carrie, or if you want to just transfer the mic to Aaron, that's fine too.
Sure. Let's go ahead. And normally we would have Will Frost, our Director of Talent Development, give an update too. Will is on PTO, so I'm going to give up his update, but I'll have Aaron go ahead. He's our Director of Marketing. And he's kind of the man behind the curtain on a lot of the really cool stuff that's coming out of our organization digitally and our marketing efforts. So Aaron, why don't you go ahead and take it over?
Yeah, thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Council and Mayor and work group tonight, just for the opportunity to share with you. Tonight, I'm going to be touching on Live the Valley specifically, which what Live the Valley is it's our marketing initiative or brand kind of put together a couple of years ago, really to help businesses solve their talent needs. One thing that we found is that there really wasn't a cohesive product for the Cedar Valley that really communicated the unique benefits and attributes that we had in our area. And so that's just what I'm going to give you an update on today. And first and foremost, the biggest thing is that we still see a large continued need for resources that help businesses attract talent. Grow Cedar Valley sent out a legislative agenda survey as we were preparing for 2021 fiscal year and the legislative agenda, and we saw that over 70% of businesses, of course, wanted to focus on the impact of COVID for their own businesses and others. And then we saw about 55% were still interested in working on initiatives and focusing on things that would benefit them in the talent game. And so the need is still very much real. And so we continue, we've had a lot of success over the past couple of years and even through this period through COVID. But first and foremost, really what we've found to be a priority is getting more content out about our area. We're really only as good as people know us to be. And so it's important for us to be sharing great information. So kind of how Live the Valley works is it's a website, a magazine, a social media brand, and then we run advertising through a bunch of different mediums. But basically, it's kind of a two-pronged approach where we want Live the Valley to stand on its own 2 feet, sharing its own content, and for example, a couple posts that we put together were talking about the companies in the Cedar Valley that were awarded as top Iowa workplaces, some of that promotional content, speaking to directly why the Cedar Valley is a great place to live and work. But then another thing that we want to do too is allow other people to use Live the Valley, to do their own promotion, whether it be companies or individuals, community members. So other things that we put together as well as are some resources for those who are currently in our community. So another post, for example, is the holiday light displays that are in the Cedar Valley this year. And so the purpose of those things is to allow for us to run our own advertising, find our own markets, but then allow companies and then individuals to share resources, then exposing their own connections and their own markets to the content. And we do this through social media, digital media. We track leads along the way. And one thing that we think is really important is instead of just sending out a bunch of information, we really think that it should fuel through our community. And so one thing that we think is really important is, along with the advertising that we're doing, again, creating content for our current community members so that they can share it, endorse it. We've seen this done by a lot of communities where they send out messaging just in advertising, and I kind of call it the umbrella method, where you're just shooting out all this content over top of your community. They never see it, and then when people see those ads, there's no comments, there's no engagement, and you really want that community endorsement if you're going to be talking about how great your community is. We also believe that tools and resources are really important, especially when people are going to make big decisions about moving and relocating. And one of those tools that we've talked about before is the cost of living calculator. It looks like Shane has plugged this into the economic development website for Cedar Falls. So really glad that you guys did that. It's a great tool. We've had a lot of fun tracking and measuring that, seeing where people are comparing cost of living to between our community and others. And instead of just telling them how great the cost of living is here, we really want to talk about why it's important with that tool. And what it allows us to do is, instead of focusing on how we have this really competitive cost of living, it also allows us to frame the conversation of this isn't just a cheap place to live because people don't want to live here, don't live here. It's competitive because it's a great place to live and there's a lot of great housing opportunities. So then kind of next, what I'm going to be talking about is some partnerships and updates from this last period that we're reporting on. Again, going back to that need from businesses, just how big talent is and how big of a deal it is. We in 2018 put together a magazine, a Live the Valley magazine, talking about all sorts of great amenities in Cedar Falls and the Cedar Valley. In that magazine, we had 3,000 printed copies and a digital version as well. And the printed copies just flew off the shelves. And so it quickly moved up our timeline for the next publication. And that publication came out this year. And so we're really excited about that. There's a digital version. There's also 5,000 printed copies, so we have a lot of great content there. Thank you to the Courier for that partnership on that. The next update in partnership is with the Iowa Economic Development Authority and their This Is Iowa campaign, which essentially is a Live the Valley campaign, but for the entire state of Iowa. And we worked with them on a video talking about our community and the amenities that we have, and they were able to use that with a few other communities in Iowa to really promote kind of the Iowa story and why it's a great place to live here. And so we saw a great return on that. We've been able to share that in our own mediums and messaging. And I know that the Iowa Economic Development Authority was able to share that through some of theirs, and that video has received over 60,000 views. So a lot of great impact on that. And then the last update that I'll share is our partnership with the Technology Association of Iowa with their project called the Iowan Project. And what that is that project goes to promote Iowa to Iowa expats who have technology degrees. So people who grew up in Iowa, maybe got a tech degree in Iowa and then have moved elsewhere for a position. And typically they would be hosting meetups across the country, where communities are able to meet with these expats and then communicate, talk about why they should come back to Iowa. And this year, of course, those didn't happen, but they still do keep in touch digitally. And so quarterly they send out a newsletter to all those talent leads. And so we were able to actually feature CFU in their fastest ISP ranking this year, which we're really excited about, and got a lot of great feedback on our website especially. And so just to wrap up just some results by the numbers, overall through this campaign since late 2018, we've reached about 2.5 million people, had about 130,000 people come to our website, resulting in a little over 1,100 talent leads, which we're really excited about. We've had some great interaction numbers-wise. We've had some great anecdotal stories about what's going on. But thank you so much for your involvement with this and supporting us, that we can continue to do fun things like this. I wish that I got more time to speak because I could talk about this all day. But again, just thank you so much for the opportunity. Carrie, I can pass it back to you.
Sure, thanks, Aaron. And Aaron is a self-professed data nerd, so he's the one that really likes to look at the results of all of these efforts and tabulate them. So thank you for your hard work and good work. As I mentioned, Will Frost would normally be giving you the talent update, and that talent is still, the attraction and retention of talent is still a priority for Grow Cedar Valley, as it is for all of you and every business in the Cedar Valley. But because of COVID, we have put recovery and resiliency that includes talent ahead of that, and it mostly recovery and resiliency goes across every channel of everything we do, but talent especially. So we're still the forefront organization that is looking at retaining and attracting talent, but we're doing it in a different way, and talent is going to look different for everyone. So our companies are telling us they need talent, they still need talent, but they need the talent to be trained and upskilled and be equipped to come back into the workforce for what they need them to do. So we're well aware of that. We work with Iowa Works, we work with IEDA, and still have that as a priority for us. And Will would tell you the same, and his notes that he left for me to share with you. And you do have the packet that has quite a bit of more information, additional information than what you're getting from our staff team. But he has been working on a pre-apprentice program on floor assembly. There are a lot of manufacturers in the area that are needing those floor assembly workers, and so we're working on a pre-apprentice program with Hawkeye, with Waterloo Career Center, with Cedar Falls Schools and UNI, and I was just on a call this afternoon with the state, and they're excited about it because it's an apprenticeship program that could be scaled across the state, but it will be launched in the Cedar Valley. They've gotten funding for the first half of the apprenticeship, and they're online to be getting funding for the second half. Will really be a big investment in workforce for the manufacturing industry. In addition, we have the Economic Inclusion Network. Many of you participated in our Economic Inclusion Summit that we had this year. We had record turnout. It was virtual, obviously, but and we were worried about that, but we had a record turnout. Our views were more than views just from the looking at the scheduled programming. So the analytics from that Economic Inclusion Conference were some of the best that we've ever had in any event. And so we know that we really reached the market of people that both needed it and wanted it. And it was very good content and good information. And then finally, if in the packet, you'll see there's a Minority Business and Entrepreneur Accelerator Program that addresses a lot of issues. It certainly addresses some of the social unrest that's going on across the country, but specifically in the Cedar Valley, we know there's a lot of talent and parts of the cultures in our community that aren't tapped to the degree that they can be. This Minority Business and Entrepreneur Accelerator Program has received funding for a certain amount of it. They've gone after more funding with Wells Fargo grant application, and they're really looking at growing the minority-owned businesses. And we at Grow Cedar Valley are welcoming them to be sponsored into our organization so they can be at the table with mentors that could be helping them with their business. And that's another big project that Will's been working on. So as you can see, we've been busy working as we always are. We appreciate our relationship with the city of Cedar Falls. Our contract with you is to provide economic development services, and I will tell you that I've worked with Lisa for 12, 13 years. I've never seen her busier than she's been, even leading up to the pandemic, but certainly through it. And I think that goes to say that, to show us all that Iowa is going to be a desirable place when some of the dust settles about both the health issues and the social issues that are going on. Iowa's going to be a very attractive place. So we want to be first in line when businesses and families are looking at relocating and growing. So again, much of the information that we didn't cover verbally tonight is in your packet. We are proud of the fact that even through the pandemic, we served all businesses that were in need, not just our investor businesses. And I know the city of Cedar Falls and the surrounding cities appreciate that, that all businesses were needing some help, and we were glad to be the resource to help them keep their head above water. So if there are any questions of the folks that are here, I know Jim Schaefer is on the Zoom call. You can't see him, but he's our Director of Investor Relations, and he does a good job of keeping out in front and listening to some of the needs and the issues, as well as the celebrations that our companies across the Cedar Valley are experiencing. So again, we would entertain any questions at this time or anytime.
And thank you very much, Carrie, and for the rest of your team as well. Being part of Grow Cedar Valley's executive board, I certainly appreciate the work that you do every day for us, and thank you for that. We do have a few minutes. If council has some specific questions, I'd be glad to entertain those. Any takers?
I might have a question for Jim Schaefer.
Okay, I'll go ahead and promote him up then.
Yeah, he hasn't spoken yet. How many businesses do you know in Cedar Falls are members of your organization?
I don't know if you can hear Jim. Oh, there he is, Jim.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Frank. I didn't hear what you were asking.
I'm wondering if you know offhand how many Cedar Falls businesses are members of Grow Cedar Valley.
I'm sorry, I don't have a breakdown of that, but I can certainly get that for you. We represent about 500 businesses and roughly 800 locations, but I can narrow that down for you for Cedar Falls.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions?
I had a quick question.
Yes, go ahead, Councilman Ronnie.
Thanks for the presentation. It was great. I was wondering if anything from COVID it has become a positive for Growth Cedar Valley. Anything that you're going to take from this that you've learned, that ways that we can maybe connect and reach out to talent and businesses that we weren't before, that you guys are going to continue to incorporate when COVID hopefully calms down and you get more back into in-person?
I'll start, but Aaron or Lisa, go ahead. I mean, I will tell you that we have recognized there are a lot of opportunities in communicating with people, as all of you have experienced and are dealing with. And I know that we keep telling each other, that this is a really painful time for folks, but there are going to be opportunities that come from this, and we need to be able to be seeing those as opportunities immediately. I don't know, Lisa, did I cut you off? I didn't mean to. Did you want to include some information too?
Yes, actually, thank you, Carrie. And Councilman Harding, that was a really good question. We're actually doing some of that right now. I mean, we're not only, I hate to use that word pivot because it's so overly used right now, but some of what I reported we are doing right now, such as the virtual meetings with international companies. There's some initiatives that I would love to participate on that would have required me to be in the EU, but it's, it's outside of my reach as an organization with what our budget will support. However, I looked at that opportunity a couple different times with individual calls with international companies, but also consultants. And I thought, well, we can do this. So yeah, international companies are one way of being able to connect right now, since there isn't a Select USA and they can't travel and we certainly can't travel, and we're doing it at a lesser cost to be able to start planting those seeds when, as Carrie said, when the economy does recover. And I think that's some of it's going to stay, and I think we'll build on it moving forward. Aaron, did you have anything to add from your perspective?
No, Yeah, I was just going to echo what you said, definitely on the economic development end. On the talent end as well, I mean, we just saw a huge, especially as COVID got underway, just people were looking for some good information about things that are going well. And I know that a lot of times, and you can see it, people are definitely moving away from the coasts. I had a presentation prepared, and one thing that was in there was there's been a lot of articles in different newspapers and publications across the country talking about how, this really, there's been a lot of just interesting stuff going on in some of the larger cities, and what they're calling them are superstar cities. And they're seeing a lot of people moving towards what they would call secondary cities, not, as big of population centers as some of those areas, just because that people, they've been tucked away, they're been tucked tightly together, and they're just gonna want some more space. And so we've started to see a lot of stories, even our area, of people who are in large metros across the country looking towards somewhere that's a little bit, with more space, more spread out. And so it's been very advantageous for us as we've been sending out messaging and being in touch that those are amenities that we have. We've had them this whole time, and now they're looked at in a more attractive light. And something even more technical that's been kind of interesting through this is just, as people were home, and sadly, of course, many lost jobs, the use of social media was up. And so that meant that our advertising was actually a lot more effective, just because more people were on social media. So kind of a good with bad, of course. Social media is looked at in a bunch of different ways, but it helped us on that end. But there's a lot of different things. I know for our events, the opportunity to have hybrid events, once it's safe to be in person again, it's going to be a huge advantage, especially as people are working from home. So definitely, a lot of things that we ran into, a lot of barriers that we had to overcome, but definitely a lot of opportunities because of it. Great question.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions? All right, well, certainly if you council or public has additional questions, you can contact Grow Cedar Valley. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. You're welcome to stay.
No, thanks. And thanks for your partnership. And I also want to thank our board chair, Chris Faraday, again, because it's the leadership that we have at our board level that really helps us as a guiding star. So appreciate all of you.
Thank you. All right, so our next item tonight is the annual report of the Cedar Falls Public Library. And with that, we have Director Kelly Stern. So
thank you. I'm Kelly Stern, and as Mayor said, I'm the director of the Cedar Falls Public Library. I've been here for 11 years, the first 9 of which were as the youth librarian, and I've been director just under 2 years. Normally we do the annual report to council in person in the library so that you can come and visit and see what's new and what's going on. Right now, though, that's not advisable. I'm hopeful, though, that next year we'll be able to do this in person. I have some slides to share. So, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Oops. Sorry. I want to start by just mentioning that our Board of Trustees has 9 members. It includes the people listed on this screen. Mike Salentic is our president. Cindy Snell is the secretary. And for those of you who like numbers, I like to share some of the numbers from our fiscal year, which runs from July 1st to June 30th of the next year. So FY20, these are the statistics from July 1st of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. Obviously, about 3.5 months of that was after COVID happened, and so our statistics are a little different from what they usually are. Total use of the collection is down by about 26%. This includes circulation of physical and downloadable items, plus successful retrieval of electronic information. So when people download articles from our databases, for example, that's a retrieval of electronic information. 26% is about what we would expect, given that 3.5 months out of that year were not typical. Total circulation of physical and downloadable materials were about 374,000. If you've ever wondered how many items the library has circulating, physical items, 121,000, just over that. with a turnover rate of 2.8. So what that means is on average, our items in our collections circulate almost 3 times each year. Now, obviously, the turnover rate varies with various sub-collections. So new materials, for example, may have a turnover rate of nearly 20, and then things that don't get used a lot, for example, biographies don't seem to circulate a lot. They're a lot lower. So, but it all averages out to about 3 times a year every item circulates. Our total physical circulation this year was just over 320,000, and ebooks circulated 35,000 times. About 65% of our total circulation is youth and young adult materials. That's interesting. We have just over 39,000 registered users. That's up 5% from last year, which isn't surprising to me because when times get tough, when there's an economic challenge, and now during COVID, when people can't go out and get for themselves everything that they need, they often turn to libraries for help, and we were only too ready to step in and help. We offer a summer library program every year to help combat the summer slide that children experience when they aren't reading during the summer. So we offer them a way to keep that up during the summer and even increase their proficiency. So we had 454 children registered this year. That's way down. We usually have about 1,500 when we're in person. 66 teens participated and 212 adults. And that's the highest number of adults we've had participate in the summer program ever. So we're thinking that maybe it has something to do with the electronic format that we used for the summer reading program. Adults seem to like it. Our door count this year was about 156,000. We had 441 uses of our meeting rooms when we were open to the public. And the library has 86 volunteers who worked over 2,600 hours in the library this year. Our reference librarians and other librarians answer information needs for people who have them. Sorry, my phone's ringing in the background. Over 14,000 reference transactions happened this year, so reference librarians helping people find information. Our public internet computers were used over 16,000 times, and our Wi-Fi sessions were way over 1 million. Now this is way up from last year. Last year that number was just over 13,000, but the reason is that the way that these are reported has changed this year. So the numbers for future years will be more in line with this. If you want to see circulation comparisons on a graph, starting in 2004 when when this building first opened. So it steadily went up until about FY16 and then dropped a bit, spiked again last year, and now we're down again because of COVID. If you want to see what types of information circulate the most, youth books obviously is the biggest chunk, followed by adult books, DVDs, and downloadables. We also have this category called Other, and that category is actually expanding right now. So in our Other category, we have things like our Library of Things, our seed library and garden tools, and a new board game collection that was added this year. So our Library of Things has things like CD players, turntables, binoculars, birdsong identifiers, any number of electronic gadgets. And I do have a story to tell about one of them. One of the things in the kit in the Library of Things is a radon detector. So the idea behind some of these items is we purchase something that people only use occasionally, or that they might want, that are, because they're pricey, they might want to try them before they invest themselves. And when the radon detector was added, somebody who checked it out came back and told me later that because of the radon detector, he found out that in their home they had a dangerously high level of radon that they didn't realize. dangerously high to the point that within another year, his family's health would have been significantly compromised. And so as a result of checking that out, they're getting that problem taken care of so that they can all be healthy. Musical instruments too. You know, if you don't know if you would like playing an instrument, you can check one out and try it before you invest. And these have been very popular. Whoops, sorry. Public access computers. This just shows you how the numbers have trended. They've been going down a bit as people, more people own their own devices and bring them with them and use the Wi-Fi. This is the number of visitors. As you notice, that it's down a little bit this year. But again, 3.5 months of that was not typical. What we've noticed in the last couple of years, though, is that fewer people come through the doors, but they check out more things, which is kind of interesting. Obviously, things have changed during COVID-19. Staff were encouraged to work from home, most of us encouraged to work from home starting in mid-March. And what library staff did while we were working from home is we used Zoom to meet as a staff and create a phased reopening plan. Other libraries across the country were doing the same thing at the same time. Many of us belong to discussion groups and social media groups for librarians, and so we borrowed from other people who were working on the same things. We shared, and we came up with a plan that basically outlines what happens at each risk level according to the Blackhawk County Health Department. So right now we're in the high risk category, which means that we're doing no contact curbside and all of our services are virtual. We're helping people by phone, by email. We have a new chat service that I'll talk about in just a minute. So we're following our phased reopening plan. It takes the guesswork out of it. As we reach each lower risk level, library services and hours will expand more. So when we get back into the moderate zone for 2 weeks, our doors will reopen and will be open for limited capacity browsing again. This picture of all of the tables in the lobby, when we went to curbside only, we had to convert part of the lobby into a staging area for holds. Now on a normal day, business as usual, we get about 70 holds placed a day for materials. You can call or you can log into your account online and place holds, and they can be ready for you to pick up when you come here. So a normal day is about 70. The day the staff were back into the building for the first time in mid-May, there were 1,100 holds. So we brought tables down from upstairs, and staff are using these tables to stage the holds to get them ready for people to pick up. We also quarantine materials. There's no way to disinfect a book effectively. We can't use liquid cleaners or even ultraviolet light to disinfect them. So the best way is to quarantine before they're reshelved. Obviously, we're doing increased cleaning throughout the day. We have hand sanitizer and disinfectant wipes available to both staff and the public throughout the building. We're doing virtual programs only right now, and those include things like book clubs for youth, teens, and adults. Story time is online through Facebook Live. Author talks, virtual art programs, writing programs. We've done a trivia program online. History lectures through the Hoover Presidential Library. And cultural literacy programs. Our cultural literacy series developed by Laura Pagel and Jessica Bamford Love in the Circulation Department won a national award last year. We've also done some outdoor programs as we've partnered with other organizations during the summer. The Youth Department partnered with Unity Point to do an outdoor gardening program for kids, and with the Hearst Center for the Arts to do an outdoor pop-up story time. Our funding for everything library comes from a number of sources. In case you didn't know this, The general fund of the city's budget pays for things like staff and our operational expenses like utilities. And then we have a library levy, also tax dollars, that pays for the collections that circulate to the public and for the staff and supplies that support those collections. And then all of our programs and special projects are funded through other sources. So the Friends of the Cedar Falls Public Library run a used bookstore on the first floor called the Book Nook. And they sell withdrawn materials that have been withdrawn from the library collections. They also take donations from the public. And they generate funding through that Book Nook, through the sales of the Book Nook, and through their membership for the Friends of the Library. So I would encourage you to join the Friends if you haven't already. And then the library has a number of funds in the Cedar Falls Community Foundation, the Robert and Shirley Berg Fund and the Catherine Ray Fund for use by the library are both used mainly for programming. And then there's also a building fund that we use for building improvements and those kinds of things. So our funding comes from a number of different places, and we're very fortunate in Cedar Falls to have a well-funded library. Also during COVID, we've been doing more take and make kits. We just opened a makerspace last year, and we've been trying to find a way to do some of that programming virtually. So the youth department has always done maker activities and crafts. Here's one of our satisfied customers on this screen who looked forward to them. The teen department also did some kits that teens could pick up curbside and do at home and then post their pictures of their projects afterwards. The youth department is doing some winter crafts right now, and some reference librarians put together some kits that go with a new database that we have that I'll tell you about in just a minute. When we're open when we're in the moderate or lower risk category, we're open for browsing with limited capacity, and we purchased the same app that the Aquatic Center used this summer. We have it connected to a monitor in the atrium so that people can see when they walk in what our available capacity is. Also, as a part of our COVID response, masks are required in the library. Staff are all wearing masks and distancing. They're masked unless they're in a closed office alone with the door shut. Some of our, during browsing hours, this picture of the little girl holding a certificate, this is one of the programs that we're especially proud of. This is 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten. It encourages families to read to their children before they start school so that they can start ready to learn to read. And this is one of our little patrons who finished the program when we were open for browsing, and she got her graduation cap and her certificate for completing the program. The picture on the bottom I want to mention because the library acts partly as a connector between community organizations. I happen to be at a career fair at UNI, and the person who was next to me was from Unity Point, and we were talking talking to students. And she mentioned to me, because she knew we had a makerspace, that they have a need at Unity Point for fidget blankets for patients. And I said, oh, that's interesting because we have a quilting group that uses our makerspace for quilting. So I connected them via Zoom, and Sally at Unity Point described what Unity Point needed. And so the quilters, a few of them at a time, brought their sewing machines to the community center. They spread out quite a bit, and they made a bunch of fidget blankets for Unity Point that patients will be able to benefit from now. We are expanding our e-materials collections. The selectors for our various collections stopped ordering so much physical stuff during quarantine, and they greatly expanded our electronic offerings. We've also added some databases. Creative Bug is a maker and craft database. It has video tutorials created by Joanne Fabric, and it's very addictive. So we've been offering some take and make kits So patrons they register for their kits online. They pick up their kits curbside. They watch a video tutorial on Creative Bug that goes with the project, and they make it at home. And we just had somebody finish one and post today her picture of her completed project. Bold 360 is the chat service that we just added to the library that reference librarians and eventually staff in other departments will be able to use as well to chat with patrons and help them in real time. And BiblioBoard is one of our newest offerings. It is a place for community creativity. So those in the community who are writers who may not be publishing through one of the big publishers can post their works on BiblioBoard and make them available to other citizens in the Cedar Valley. But in addition to writing, you can also share art, you can share audio files, you can share music files. We're hoping that some of our Cedar Falls residents will capture their COVID stories either in writing or pictures or video and share them in BiblioBoard, where we have created a portal for the community's COVID stories. Some other key highlights of FY20 included that we went fine-free. When our board voted to make the library fine-free, the Waterloo Public Library director talked to me about it, and they decided that they would go fine-free at the same time. So the Courier did a story about it when we first went fine-free. The reason it's so important and that it's a growing trend across the country for libraries to go fine-free is that fines are a barrier to access for some patrons. Libraries should be a place, because taxpayers already pay for library service, and overdue fines seem like a double tax. But everybody should have access, and fines shouldn't be a barrier. It doesn't mean that it's just a free-for-all. You can't just keep something forever. When something is due, if a patron doesn't return it, their account doesn't let them check anything else out until they either return or renew what they have overdue. The exception to fine-free is the Library of Things, which are in high demand and circulate. They have a high circulation rate. But we are fine-free now. And we also achieved Tier 3 reaccreditation this year. Our library has been Tier 3 accredited in the past, and we come up for reaccreditation every 3 years. There are 29 standards that every library has to meet that deal with every aspect of library operations, from the budget to the facility to staffing to community support, just all kinds of things. And then in addition to those 29 standards to be Tier 3 accredited, we also have to meet 20 out of 38 optional standards. The Cedar Falls Public Library met 34 out of those 38 optional standards. And we completed our library strategic plan. So part of the accreditation process is making sure that you have an updated strategic plan. So we did our community data gathering right before COVID in February, and then our consultants worked with staff and community members during quarantine via Zoom to complete the plan, to evaluate the data and come up with a plan. Our plan for the next 3 to 5 years is posted on the library's website, and it covers everything from expanding collections and services to trying to find better ways to reach non-users of the library and to try to further narrow the digital divide between our citizens. Coming up next at the Cedar Falls Public Library, we have a carpet project, a capital improvement project happening in the spring. We're going to be branding soon. We've never been branded, so it's time. We're going to continue to offer purposeful multi-generational programming that both appeals to and meets the academic needs of the community. We're going to continue to increase our community connections and collaborations. Libraries should be a hub of the community. Also this year or next year, we'll have a story walk installed at Big Woods Lake. Our youth librarian, Rebecca Hosford, worked with Public Works to identify a place where a story walk can be installed, and funding has been approved from the Cedar Falls Community Foundation to pay for it. So a story walk, it has those pedestals where, you know, that we have around the city that has information about the city, has pedestals, but instead of those plaques, it's going to have 2-page spreads from picture books. And these are spaced throughout Big Woods Lake Park, so that along the trail, so that as families walk, they can also read a picture book. So it combines physical activity with mental stimulation as well. So we're excited about that. So as I mentioned, nobody, I think, wants the library to go back to business as usual more than library staff do. We have the most creative and dedicated library staff in our city as I've ever seen and had the pleasure to work with. We're really looking forward to the time when we can open the doors and do business as usual again. Until then, though, we will continue to look for ways to meet the needs of the community. Mayor Green once called us the community's living room, and we definitely want to be that in person as well as virtually sooner rather than later. I would be glad to answer questions. What questions do you have?
We do have a few minutes here, so I'll steal Councillor Harding's question from earlier. Are there practices or things that have happened because of COVID that even once we're past it, you're going to keep in effect because it's helped you out significantly?
I'm glad you asked that because I meant to mention it. So curbside service has been so popular that that's probably something that's going to stay after COVID. There are people who you know, who prefer that, and it's convenient. And after, you know, after the risk is low, there will be still some people who find that convenient. So we'd like to try to keep providing it. Also related to that, in another attempt to try to increase access to the public, one of the reference librarians and I have been looking into the idea of outdoor lockers, where somebody can place holds. We put it in the locker for them. They get a code via an app that gives them the code to unlock the locker. They can come anytime, 24 hours a day, and pick up their holds. We just had a presentation from a company in Des Moines just last week, so we're following up on that, and we'll see if we can make that happen as well. We're always looking for ways to improve. So thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? I do have one last one. You mentioned being at tier 3 right now.
Yes.
And is there a plan to try to move up to tier 2, or is that really geared towards larger libraries?
I should have mentioned tier 3 is the highest you can go. Tier 3 is what you want to be.
Great.
Tier 0 is the lowest, and tier 3 is the highest. So we're already at the highest.
Okay, congratulations then.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, if no other questions from council, then thank you so much, Kelly, for your presentation tonight. And we look forward to seeing you at the library. I certainly recommend the board games collection. My family has greatly enjoyed that, and it's a terrific way to test drive games before actually purchasing. So with that, thank you. And our next item tonight is going to be a subdivision code amendment final plat phasing. And we have Karen Howard, who is our Planning and Community Services Manager, giving the presentation for that tonight. So Ms. Howard.
Yes, good evening. This is an issue we bring before you to a couple of small amendments to our subdivision code. This is really an issue, it was prompted by an issue that we're experiencing in the community right now. And as you know, our ordinances are really tools to implement our policies and address problems that we're experiencing. So I'm going to share my screen and give an overview of the proposed amendments to the subdivision code, which the Planning and Zoning Commission has reviewed in detail and has recommended approval. Can everyone see my screen okay?
We can.
All right, very good. So just a little background information. The purpose of the subdivision code really mirrors what is in Iowa code, the state code. It establishes the minimum standards for the design, development, and improvement of subdivisions within the city so that existing land uses will be protected and so that adequate provisions are made for the public facilities and services and so that our community can grow in an orderly manner consistent with our comprehensive plan and to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare of the citizens of the city. So that's the overarching purpose of the subdivision code, and that, as I said, mirrors what is in the state code. We have two stages of platting, subdivision platting that occurs. The first stage of that process is to a developer brings in a preliminary plat. The purpose for that is to really show the layout of what they're proposing for the streets, the blocks and the lots, and show how they're going to extend the public improvements to serve those new lots. It identifies sensitive environmental features that might be on that parcel of land and how those will be protected or their loss mitigated. It shows how the new development will fit into the larger community of neighborhoods. And also ensure it will be designed to protect the interests of current and future property owners. And to ensure those goals are met, the code requires that owners include the entirety of their contiguous holdings on the preliminary plat. So sometimes that is a fairly large acreage of land. It's owned by the same owner and developer. And they may not want to develop that all in one piece. So the final plat then is really the stage of the project where you actually can build the infrastructure and actually sell lots after you final platted a portion of that preliminary plat. So with the final plat, it is the obligation of the owner or developer to design and construct all the public improvements necessary to support that proposed development. And the cost of these improvements is really then incorporated into the price of the lots made available for sale with the final plat approval. So with the larger developments, the land is often final platted in phases based on the pace of development because the construction of those improvements, of course, is an upfront cost to the developer that is only then captured upon sale of the lots. So the issue right now is that our subdivision code does not currently include specific rules regarding final plat phasing. So while a phasing plan is sometimes received, we request that when they submit a preliminary plat so we can see how they're intending the development to build out. It's been largely left up to the developer to determine the order of development. So in some cases, this practice has resulted in critical street connections remaining unfinished. As you know, an incomplete or inefficient street pattern has both short and long-term costs to the community. So here's some of those costs to the community. Sometimes these are hidden, but really a poorly planned subdivision phasing, particularly when it's combined with poorly connected street network in general, can result in increased commute times, overburdening certain streets with excess traffic, impacting the homeowners along those particular routes, safety concerns for pedestrians along those congested routes, particularly children, say walking to school, for example, increased driver frustration, sometimes it leads to speeding. It can increase our emergency response times as well if we don't have well-connected street patterns. And then inefficient routing for our utilities and services such as refuse pickup and snow plowing. And I just want to bring this up as sort of an example. I know that it's one of the areas that we've received a lot of complaints about a disconnected street pattern recently. There, of course, are probably other places around the city, and I'm sure that if we don't address some of these issues, we may have future issues as well. So here you can see really a lack of connections between the subdivisions. So one of the biggest issues, if you don't have a well-connected street pattern between subdivisions, it only leads to more issues as subdivisions build out if those critical connections aren't connected in a timely manner. So here you can see the Prairie Winds, Prairie West, Meadows subdivisions around Aldrich Elementary School. And of course, you all know that we're having some issues because Ashworth has not been completed over to the elementary school. That leaves very few routes to school. And so with the final plat phasing, these alternative routes, other than Eric Road and from the south, it leaves very few routes and creates a lot of congestion on Eric Road. Also on the northern part of the there's a connection on Ironwood that has not connected to Green Hill Road as well. So that's another subdivision, West Village subdivision, that there's a small connection there that hasn't been completed. So, you know, our commuter routes, people trying to get around the community, all these homes have built out in these subdivisions, and there have been very few connections to the surrounding arterial streets. So it reduces the routes that people can take to get to their destinations throughout the day. And I throw this next slide up as just sort of food for thought. This is, of course, an aerial photograph. You can see a portion of the older part of the community in the downtown area and the original traditional pattern of gridded streets, short blocks, well-connected street patterns, and then some newer areas of the community to the west of that. As development patterns changed over the decades, we got away from that gridded street pattern. And while, you know, you don't need to always develop with a grid, connecting the streets is pretty important. You know, some of the examples of, you know, when we have a lot of development in the downtown area, but you rarely hear about any one of those streets being overburdened with traffic because there's so many different routes that people can take in the gridded street pattern that we have here in that well-connected street pattern. And then if there's emergencies, or for example, the windstorm that we had earlier this year, when there were a lot of trees down, it didn't create a big issue because people could always go around to the next block over to get to their destination. So you can see in some of the other parts of the community how that might create an issue. If there's trees down across the street, it may create people that have to drive quite a bit ways around to get to their destination. So I think we need to take a look at the connectivity of our street patterns and look at some of those standards in our subdivision code as we move forward. So, but as a first step, really, we need to address this issue about the phasing of our subdivisions. So we'll make sure that we're doing those carefully and scrutinizing those at the time of preliminary plat. So the first step would then to be require a phasing plan at the time of preliminary plat and establish a standard for final plat phasing to ensure that critical infrastructure connections occur prior to less critical areas of a subdivision. Now, every subdivision is different, every piece of land is different, so we need to give the flexibility to the developer to propose phasing that meets the pace of market demand, but also then to give some discretion to the city council to determine if that final plat phase can function as an independent development. And what I mean by that is we don't know the pace of development. So a development may take 20 years to build out a large development. Things may change in that 20 years. So development may slow down in one part of the community. So we want to make sure that when somebody builds out a part of a subdivision as a final plat, that can function. It has the stormwater management, it has the street connections, it has the routes needed and the other infrastructure needed to continue to work and serve the people that live in that final platted area. And then finally, to ensure that no essential infrastructure improvements are being circumvented or delayed in the process. So once again, we're bringing this forward to address a problem we're experiencing here in Cedar Falls. We have received numerous complaints from residents. Concerns have been expressed by you folks about traffic congestion and safety concerns by delays in extending critical street segments. The proposed amendments here will focus attention on this particular aspect of land development to prevent these situations in the future. The proposed language is drafted to ensure that each subdivision will be reviewed on its own merits, all unique circumstances or characteristics, so they can be considered. It will serve as a quality control reminder for the developer, the staff, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the City Council to review the plat with an eye toward ensuring that those critical connections get prioritized in the phasing of a plat. So moving on to a couple other points I would like to make, sorry. In conclusion, really, providing that clear direction in the code will ensure that the rules are applied consistently and fairly over time for all developers, and requiring one development phase, just a reminder, to occur prior to a less critical phase does not necessarily mean additional cost to the developer. That was a question that the Planning and Zoning Commission had when we were discussing it. And just as an example, the cost of installing a 300-foot segment of street is recaptured with the sale of lots on either side of that street segment. So requiring a different but more critical 300-foot segment of street to be constructed first would not necessarily result in additional cost to the developer, but may result in reduced costs and benefits to the community as a whole as more efficient travel route is established. And then finally, the provision will ensure that a subdivision is not platted in a manner that leaves out one small segment of critical infrastructure that is then unlikely to ever be completed except by the city at taxpayer expense. So with that, here's the two small paragraphs to accomplish some of those goals. One is in the preliminary plat section of the subdivision code, and I just note a couple small clarifications that were made since I sent the PowerPoint presentation to you last Friday, just to improve the language and clarify it a little bit further. So what this says is if the proposed preliminary plat will be developed in phases, a subdivision phasing plan shall be submitted for review with an emphasis on ensuring the timely connection of streets and other improvements to ensure a well-connected street pattern with multiple shorter and more direct routes between neighborhood destinations, and to ensure that critical street routes are completed first to reduce traffic congestion, encourage safe walking and biking, improve emergency access and response times, and to allow efficient provision of public utilities and services. And then another paragraph amendment added to the subdivision code in the final plat section of the subdivision code. So when we get to the final plat stage, then we can take a look at, in response to the pace of market demand, if the subdivider final plats only a portion of the development illustrated on the preliminary plat. We want to make sure that that final plat phase can function as a separate development. So we're looking at all the infrastructure, the street access, the stormwater management, the utilities, to make sure that no essential public infrastructure are delayed. So in general, we want them to follow their phasing plan that was approved at preliminary plat. But since it might have been years ago that phasing plan was adopted and approved, we want to make sure that there's not anything that's changed, that we might want to change a little bit of that phasing to make sure that those critical connections or that essential infrastructure is not delayed. And that this paragraph itself will help kind of balance the interests between the private property rights of the developer and the public goals that we have for ensuring orderly growth of the community. So staff recommends amending the subdivision code as we proposed here. The Planning and Zoning Commission discussed the proposed amendments at their August 12th, August 26th meeting, and then further discussed it at their October 28th meeting and recommended approval. We've put an item on your agenda tonight to set the public hearing for your December 21st meeting to hold that hearing and review and approve the amendments. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. For council, which questions would you like for her to address tonight? I do have one. When we talked about streets having access and being able to use infrastructure appropriately, is the idea of cul-de-sacs. Has there been any discussion about limiting or preventing developers from establishing cul-de-sacs and new subdivisions because of the fact that they don't provide through access?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we actually already have some guidance in the subdivision code that cul-de-sacs are discouraged and should only be allowed where there's some barrier to extending the street. So we should really be keeping an eye on those. And I think we may not have been so careful about always making sure that the streets are connected through. And one of the things we talked about at the Planning and Zoning Commission is there are some additional improvements we'd like to make in the subdivision code to improve our connectivity standards, maybe put some block links, put more emphasis on ensuring that we don't do a lot of cul-de-sacs, making sure that developers, once they establish a street pattern, will connect it to the boundaries of their subdivision. So it's not just one street connection over to the next subdivision, it's all the streets have to be connected to the boundary so that they all can be extended. And so we have that well-connected street pattern.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Cruz, go ahead.
Thank you. In the preliminary plat, is this where the zoning change from, say, agricultural or R1 needs to be accomplished, or can you do that in phases? What is the expectation in that regard, if I'm asking that correctly?
So the rezoning stage happens before the platting stage. So that is really the time that we would look, if a developer brings in a rezoning from ag land to, say, R1 for residential development, we should be keeping an eye toward whether street access is available, whether infrastructure is available, whether it meets our comprehensive plan. So that is really the time that the city has a lot of power to make a decision on whether the area is ripe for development. And so that really has to occur before somebody can bring in a subdivision plat.
So the zoning change would be requested based on some expected idea of a development for a developer. So we would want to know what they're thinking for proposal, I'm assuming.
Right. So I think a lot of times the developer does have some notion about how they would like to develop a piece of property. And as you know, we have a number of zones where we require a master plan at the rezoning stage. So we do have some ability to understand how they will develop the neighborhood, how it will be designed, how they'll connect the streets and extend the infrastructure. We tend to get a lot of requests for that RP zoning, the residential plan development, and that does require that master plan. So that is another stage that we can really look at how they're planning to develop.
Hey, Karen, maybe you want to touch a little bit on the land use plan as well and how that should all fit together.
Right. So the city does have a comprehensive plan, and so that's one of the biggest things we look at the rezoning stage to make sure that what they're proposing to do is consistent with the goals and the vision that we've set out for ourselves in that part of the community. So we really should be keeping an close eye on that as well.
Okay, so if no other questions from council,
Mayor?
yes, go ahead.
I just had a question with Karen. Number one, make sure you thank the P&Z for their hard work on that. I know the kind of effort that takes. During your discussion at P&Z, were there developers involved in the discussion? How do you anticipate them reacting to these changes?
I know I had a number of calls from various developers asking questions about it. We did not have developers participate in the conversation at the Planning and Zoning Commission. We had it on the agenda 3 different meetings. So there was a lot of opportunity for people to weigh in. And of course, we have a couple, we have several architects and a builder on our commission. So there were a lot of very good questions that were asked, and we kind of really dove deep into all the implications of these changes.
Well, thank them for their work.
I have a quick question.
Yes, Councilor Harding, go ahead.
So looking at the graphic you showed of the older area of town that's set up like a grid, and then I was studying some newer areas, and I never really thought about it before. Why have we gotten away, not saying one's better than the other, but why have we gotten away from a grid type layout, and why do modern developments seem to have a more abstract flow to the roads and such?
I think that's a really big question. That's a really good question, but it's really how I think this has happened all over the United States. The evolution of how we're thinking about building our neighborhoods has changed. And so I think there has been a lot of study about whether we've gone too far away from some of those principles of those traditional neighborhoods that were probably good to follow as far as the connectivity. I think modern, we have a lot more information now about the topography, and so developers can really design it to fit the land better. So you get some of those more curvilinear streets and some of those attractive features that people would like in their neighborhoods. But that doesn't mean that we can't still have connected street pattern. You can have curvilinear streets and also have the connectivity that's going to help circulate the traffic around the community.
Just an observation. It was like the new design of the streets would give you less streets to snowplow. You'd have a little more housing lots in the area because you don't have a cross street every traditional block size. You'd have longer areas. Just looking at it, if you put the map up, you could see it right away. There's less overall streets. So.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a trade-off there, and the question is whether we've got too far the other direction. Maybe there's a lot of hidden costs here to having such a disconnected street pattern. I think we're experiencing some of those today in the community.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ms. Howard. We'll move on then with our zoning code amendment. We're looking at an adaptive reuse of institutional buildings in residential zones. And with that, we have Chris Cedar, one of our planners, who will give that presentation tonight. So Mr. Cedar, it's all yours.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then Chris can give the presentation.
You can hear me?
Just fine. Go right ahead.
Good. Okay, perfect. Cool. Well, back in April or maybe March or April, we received a call from the owner of a church building that sits in the southeast part of town. As we understand it, a while back, the pastor of the church passed away, and the church has since sat vacant with very few options in terms of allowed land uses. It sits in the R1 residential zone, and they have only 4 realistic options. One is to continue to sit vacant. Another is to sell to another church. They could convert the use to a public or parochial school, or they could tear down and subdivide into residential lots. Now, the owner of this property was hoping to use the property to host wedding receptions, which is already a commonly accepted activity under the umbrella of churches and religious institutions. But without a religious institution, this use would be a principal commercial use that is prohibited by code even in the R4 zone. It is important to note that institutional facilities are properties with unique characteristics. They are large buildings on large parcels, and they often have some historical or cultural value. That said, it seems appropriate to cautiously provide flexibility of use while considering the neighborhood context. Next slide. So as this issue came up, I undertook a research effort speaking with planners at Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, and Council Bluffs. While a number of these planners indicated that they have encountered similar inquiries about repurposing obsolete institutional buildings, only Council Bluffs and Iowa City have pursued ordinance amendments. From those conversations, I'm convinced that we should not add alternative uses by right in the zoning code, but it seems appropriate to put forward an amendment that provides alternatives that are subject to review and approval by a board or commission with authority to do so. What I would propose is that this be in the form of a conditional use permitting process that doesn't guarantee that a use is approved, but it may be granted by our board of adjustment if it appears appropriate to the neighborhood context. So next slide. The following are issues we need to consider in such a policy. First, not all uses are compatible with residential neighborhoods. The policy should likely limit the alternative uses that can be considered. Second, the nuisance issues such as noise and traffic will be important to evaluate when considering alternative uses. Third, allowing an opportunity for neighborhood input will be important in the review process. So giving notice to adjacent or nearby property owners should be required. And fourth, depending on the proposed use and the characteristics of the site, additional conditions may need to be imposed, such as additional parking, limits to hours of operation, restrictions on use of amplified sound to ensure compatibility with the neighborhood. Next slide. So what uses are compatible and likely should qualify for consideration? Uses such as retreat facilities, guest houses, commercial meeting halls and event facilities. Conversion to a multi-unit dwelling where we actually have a church turned multifamily, as it was in an R4 zone. The church pictured on the slide here is a building at 1404 Main Street that in 2012 was converted to a 10-unit multi-family building. Other areas, museums, senior centers, community centers, neighborhood centers, youth club facilities, social service, physically or mentally disabled, specialized educational facilities such as music schools, dramatic schools, dance studios, martial arts studios. You kind of get the idea. And then also professional offices such as accountants, lawyers, and architects. Next slide. As far as criteria for evaluation, these listed factors are important to consider. Each case should be considered on its own merits, and it makes sense to evaluate a use against the backdrop of the uses that were previously permitted. Churches and other institutional uses are not without traffic in the evening. So in order to evaluate hours of operation compatible with the neighborhood context, will noise levels be at or below the levels produced by the previously permitted use or otherwise controlled in a manner that is composed use be similar or less than what was generated by the previously permitted use? Will the proposed use draw similar or lower numbers of people to the site than the previously permitted use? Will it draw large groups, small groups, constant stream of visitors? Will the frequency of activity be similar or less intense than the previously permitted use? Will it be every day, just weekends? Does the proposed use require any updates to parking or landscaping to address issues of neighborhood compatibility or otherwise compliance with current zoning standards? Is special consideration warranted in order to preserve a building or site of historical or cultural value? What kind of signage, if any, should be allowed? Is there neighborhood support for the proposal? Have any neighborhood concerns been adequately? So next slide. Without any further ado, let's get into the code language. So I'm not going to read it word for word, but we'll point out highlights. So it was by his recommendation that we use the Board of Adjustment, which is the standard in Iowa. His recommendation was not surprising to me because all the codes that I reviewed utilize the Board of Adjustment in special exception and conditional use cases. So the applicant will bear the burden of proof that they meet all requirements as set forth in this section. As far as precedent, other cases have no bearing on the future cases and cannot serve as support or reasoning for approval of a request. This is because all neighborhoods are unique and it will be important to judge each case on its own merits. For instance, a decision about a church close to downtown should have no bearing on a decision about a church in the Cedar Heights neighborhood. Point D here indicates that all regulations of the base zone and overlays still apply. Next slide. So this part gives room for other conditional uses to be added in the future, but this one about adaptive reuse of institution buildings will be the first on the list. So here we have a description of the situations that apply and essentially the potential requirements that may be imposed as conditions if use is granted. We're talking things like additional screening, landscaping, and additional limitations. Next slide.
Did we lose Chris?
I think we
Chris, are
did.
you-
He might just be thinking really hard for a moment there, but it looks like he's not with us.
Okay. Well, until he gets back online, just for efficiency. Chris, are you there?
That we propose in the code.
Perhaps he
Sounds like
should.
Chris is having some challenging issues, so maybe I can just run through the rest of this just in the interest of time.
Yes, please do. And I'll mute Chris.
So in the recommendation, then there's only certain uses that would qualify to even request a conditional use in this regard. And so here's a list of the types of things that they could request. So you can see here that not everything would be allowed, only the certain uses that we feel like could potentially fit into any given neighborhood. But once again, as Chris pointed out, each case would be then considered on its own merits. So not all of these things would be appropriate in all of the areas of the community, but they at least can request a conditional use. Then it's up to the board then to review each request. And here's the approval criteria, meaning these are all the things, standards that the requester would need to meet to show that it would fit into the context of the neighborhood. So they would have to show that the burden of proof is on the applicant then to show how it would fit into the neighborhood, and it would provide all the necessary facilities, access, roads, parking, anything else that would need to be taken into account. And of course, all the neighborhood concerns could be addressed through that hearing process at the Board of Adjustment. There's also a list of things that the applicant would need to submit with their application so that we could review those carefully. And so the board would have enough information to make a good decision. And with that, the Planning and Zoning Commission did review this at several of their meetings and had some discussion about it. They did feel that it was a really good to provide some flexibility in the ordinance to allow the repurposing of some of these important buildings in our community. Some of these are historic, historic buildings, buildings that people are fond of. And so providing some ability for people to request an alternative use would be something that the Planning and Zoning Commission has supported, and staff feels like it's a good change and to add to our zoning ordinance. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about the ordinance itself.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Miller, go ahead.
Karen, a couple questions. The one that was done in 2012, I believe, on Main Street, the difference there was that was an R4 versus an actual institutional designation?
Yes, that was because it was in an R4 district, and it did allow multifamily then because it was in a multifamily zone. So that allowed that to be repurposed.
So are there things we're trying to avoid here? I mean, properties change, I understand the historical side of it, but why not just allow somebody to go for a zoning change? Why put a conditional use on it? Is that to protect the neighborhood or?
Right. So a lot of these properties, some of them are really large, but some of them are fairly small. And so it'd be difficult to just zone one property to a different designation. And it's likely that would trigger some question about whether that was an illegal spot zone. So what this would do is allow it to be conditionally reviewed to see if it would fit into that neighborhood under the existing zoning. So we have a number of churches right now or religious institutions. The Martyrs Retreat property, as you know, the northern and the north part of the community, that one now has been sold, and so they're going to need to figure out, whether that needs to come down and they build something completely new out there, or if they can repurpose that for something else. There's the Mennonite church that's close to downtown, so that's a completely different context there, and that's another example of maybe something different can be done with that to preserve that building and make it kind of an interesting alternative use. And as Chris mentioned, the other one was in South Cedar Falls, the Cornerstone Church is the one that's being requested for alternative use.
I was overlooking the spot zoning and state law side of it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, any other questions from council on this item?
I got a question.
Yes, Councilmember Cruz.
On that slide, you had 5 or 6 different categories of things. Is that something you pulled from state code or some other source? Because I didn't see something there that would allow, what would you say, a yet to be determined thought for a project to give a little latitude, a little creativity. I mean, if somebody came with an idea that's not on the list, can we still entertain the idea with the vote of the council or somebody?
We would need to amend the ordinance in order to do that. What we tried to do, and Chris did a pretty good job of looking through all the various uses that may be appropriate for a religious institution building, or even another type of institutional building like a school that maybe becomes defunct, to try to look at the kind of uses. And there's a pretty broad range of uses that we feel like are listed there that could be requested. So if there's something there that you think is not on the list,
Well, I was just thinking if the final point could be a generic statement that yet to be determined list that's appropriate and fits all the criteria of the stated code section. If that's too open for manipulation, or you don't want to go that route.
I think and Attorney Rogers could weigh in here, but typically if you have a conditional use process, you need to keep it fairly defined so that the Board of Adjustment just doesn't have complete latitude to, people can't request just anything. So they only have the power to grant conditional uses for very circumscribed conditions that are spelled out specifically.
Okay, listed. Okay.
I would just add that generally that's a great idea to have a catch-all for unanticipated uses, but as Karen mentioned, the Board of Adjustment, the conditional uses must be pretty well circumscribed to keep it truly a conditional use and not what would in effect be sort of a rezoning, which would be unlawful.
Can you elaborate then on the spot zoning? Because I'm not that familiar with what that entails. Mr. Miller referenced state code, but can you summarize that a little bit, Mr. Rogers?
Sure. The concept of zoning, it establishes certain areas in a city that are appropriate for certain uses. And when you go into an area that's zoned in a certain way and you pick out a lot within that area and zone it to a different zoning classification, that's called spot zoning. And really what you're doing then is you have no zoning at all. If you're free to go and rezone an individual lot, why do you have any zoning districts at all? And so common law has developed over the years that forbids that type of land use management by cities.
And that's what they call spot zoning.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And partially because that becomes too subjective, correct? Right.
Right.
Well, technically, isn't that still spot zoning? And that if it's zoned R1 or R2 and you then allow them to put a multi-unit dwelling or professional office, we now have something that's not allowed in R1 or R2 in that zoning classification. So it seems like it's still spot zoning. You're just kind of getting around it.
So I think it's a pretty common practice to have conditional uses, or sometimes they're called special exceptions. So they're specifically described in the zoning ordinance very specifically, so that the Board of Adjustment doesn't have the latitude to then just grant anything. So what we've tried to do is pick out things that we may think are appropriate. Now, the Board of Adjustment has the power then to say it's not appropriate in this particular location, what you're proposing to do, and so we deny it. So the idea behind a conditional use, one way to think about it is that you start out at no. The answer is no, it's not allowed in this particular zone, but maybe yes, with certain conditions applied.
So then what you're saying then, to Susan's point, is that if you got something R1 or R2, a former church site, then somebody could say, I want to build a 16-plex, but then right away, the character of the neighborhood and other criteria would eliminate it pretty quickly. The board.
Yes, that it could be appropriate in one place and not appropriate in another, for example.
Even though it's on the list of those five special uses. Okay, makes sense.
But quick question.
Just real quick, before Councilmember Harding asks, with the change or actually no, go ahead, Councilmember Harding.
So, but Councilmember Cruz just said a 16-plex, but this just talks about repurposing the existing building or church there. It's not talking about you can knock it down and rebuild something. We're just talking about a conditional use permit of the existing building in that area to preserve that actual building, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It doesn't say that though.
It does. It does say it. It says a conditional. Well, that's how I read it. But
first slide.
Yeah.
So they can't tear it down?
Yeah.
It could be. It can be torn down, and made into residential lots, subdivided.
No, they were saying that yes, that's one of the options of the church. But I thought this conditional use clause was so that you didn't have to tear it down.
Yeah, reuse the building.
Reuse the building.
Save the historical value of that property.
Yep.
Right. Well, what I was getting at then a little bit ago is you could still have the same square building, or if it's square, whatever the old building was, and inside of it put in a 16-plex. In R1 zone, I mean, you'd still have discretion to turn that down because of parking or noise or what have you.
Right.
not a given just because it's on the list. That's we're putting together there that they can do that. It's got to fit all the other criteria. Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay, any other questions for Ms.
No.
Howard or Mr. Seeley?
Excuse me, Mayor, aren't we just tonight approving first public reading of this anyway?
No.
No,
So
we aren't.
for tonight, yeah, we're not actually, it's just public hearing, correct?
So we haven't put anything on your agenda for tonight. We really wanted to have the discussion with you at the committee of the whole meeting to make sure that this is something you wanted to move forward. The Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended approval, but if you're okay with what's being proposed here, we will then set the public hearing at your 21st meeting for your first meeting in January. So the hearing would actually be in January.
Does that require just one reading or three?
No, this is a change to the ordinance, so it would require 3 readings of the
Yeah,
ordinance.
so that's all we're doing tonight, forward.
So you want a consensus is what you're saying to move forward with this concept.
We just wanted to make sure that what's being proposed is the way you would like it to be proposed, and we will then move it forward for setting a public hearing at your next meeting.
I'd like more clarification on how it is not spot zoning. More clarification on it before it goes to an ordinance.
I just want to clarify that for Councilmember DeBerg. It's fine.
But it wouldn't go to an ordinance till we've read it 3 times anyway, right?
Right, that's right. That's correct.
Can't we make some changes at the first reading even if we have to?
I think if you change it, doesn't it have to go back to stage 1 again?
Yeah.
Whatever, whichever. But
Well,
we're
at
referring
the
to more.
at the hearing, you're going to have ordinance language brought forward, I'm assuming.
Right.
Yes, we have ordinance language drafted, and I think that's what we had shown on the screen tonight. And of course, that ordinance language will be forwarded to you. When we set the public hearing, we can send that full ordinance language so you have another chance to look at it.
So
and then, of course, at
basically
the public hearing, you can discuss it.
You're asking for consensus.
Basically, we're just asking if you had any questions and see if you want to move forward with it. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's consensus, I guess.
No need for an actual motion or vote.
Right.
Mr. Mayor.
Right.
Yes, go ahead.
It just seems like the people that buy around a church are counting on that to be a church. It seems like spot zoning otherwise, and you would have to have some real language in there that saved whatever neighborhood it was, and they would have to have a big pitch in whatever it was turned into. Otherwise, it looks to me like it'd just be spot zoning. I think it should have to be whatever the zoning surrounding it is, but that's just my opinion.
Well, the understanding as I got it was that the neighborhood would have buy-in for it, because
it would almost have to, but I think those people are counting on it staying a church. That's why they bought next to it. They knew it was always going to be quiet.
Well, the issue with that though is you'd have an empty building potentially, and I would rather have some use in that building than an empty husk for years. So I guess
it would fill up eventually, I believe.
Doesn't that tie into the original preliminary plat?
Okay.
So
it may go back decades.
Yeah, if the church was taken down or the building removed, certainly depends on the area of the land, and somebody could come in and do something different with the land, of course, and plat it for something else.
Okay,
And if they platted it for something other than, if they platted it for something other than what was in that zoning, it would have to go in for zoning review.
That's correct, yes.
But if you go with these changes, they wouldn't have to do that.
That's right. That's right.
If they use the existing building,
Yes.
but they can't tear it down and do something outside of R1.
Right. That's correct.
Okay, so it sounds like
What you're saying, real quick comment then. If you're tearing down the building, your use is dictated by whatever the zone is it's sitting in.
Right. Once you've demolished it, you're sitting there with a vacant piece of ground, and you have to comply with the underlying zoning.
Whatever, R1, R2, R4.
So yeah, it seems like some of us are thinking on different pages. Just to be a clarifier, this just allows us to be creative with the use of the current building on the land. So we can have a church there and think of something creative to do with it and not have to tear it down. That's how I'm taking it.
Yes, that's the only thing that's being allowed here with this ordinance.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we will see this again, and as it moves forward, and with that, that'll close our committee of the whole meeting and move us over to our regular city council meeting. And I understand channel 15 usually needs about 5 minutes to set up. So on my clock, it's 7:03. So we'll pick up again at 7:08, 5 minutes from now. Thank you.